Computer. Okay, hello, welcome to my podcast. I'm your host Larry Liu, and today I'm joined by Matthias Stelzmüller. He is co-founder and chief marketing officer at For Sports. He's also a publisher, chief editor, and owner at the DailySports print magazine. He has been a travel journalist as well, so he recently brought out a, you could say, short documentary film going different countries in the world on roller skates. And yeah, he has also been a professional skate athlete. And he has previously acquired a master's degree in executive management and business administration at the Fachhochschule in Wien, which is like a professional school. And I know him from uh, secondary school days back in the Rheine Gymnasium back in Vienna. And Matthias, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for the introduction.
There's a lot of things that has happened in your life, so we should best go over it here. But first, I ask you about the documentary film because that's how we got in touch. How did that come about? I mean, where did you get the idea to skate the world?
Yeah, well, I tried to make a long story as short as possible. I actually did more than 10 years short track speed skating on a professional level. And when I retired, I saw that in Austria, most sports are not famous at all because media is just not covering most sports except of skiing and soccer. So I started a sport magazine. Then with some connections, I got to travel journalism, and I was allowed to travel many countries for the Traveler. It's an Austrian B2B travel magazine. And I always had my inline skates with me because for me, it always was the best way to get around in the city, especially if I don't know it, because you really get a deep insight. You can do a deep dive, you meet new people with the skates, you go to places you wouldn't go to as a tourist. And then they just asked me from the travel magazine if I would like to write a story about it. So I did that, and the response was quite good. And now, since 4 years, I mostly get invited to go to other countries and to visit them on skates and then tell my experience about it.
Wow. And so that means the travel magazine. I mean, they organize the whole tour. The flight tickets, the itinerary, and all these things. I mean, or they help you out with that.
Exactly. Usually, I don't have to pay for most of the travel expenses. So I go there. Sometimes there's like a certain program. Sometimes there's no program at all. Sometimes I'm alone. Sometimes I'm traveling with a group. And so far, I always found a lot of time to go around alone on my skates.
And what is the experience that you take away from, you know, skating? I mean, first of all, just the physical experience of it. I mean, because I would imagine that it would be very tiring, to be out there for many, many hours. I mean, could you maybe describe your schedule? Like, how would a typical day of skating look like?
Usually, no matter where I am, actually, I try to start very early because in most countries, traffic gets bad from like 8 in the morning. So if I start before, I already get used to the city, to the streets. Depending on which continent you're skating, the roads are better or worse. And yeah, so I start pretty early in the morning. And then most of the time, I look for like one spot where I want to go. And then I don't follow a certain track. I just go wherever it takes me. If I see a nice side road or something, I just go there, and I'll try to go. I try to skate around with, how do I say it? So wenig Vorurteile wie möglich. As like I just try to experience it and see what happens. And sometimes I meet someone on the road, and they tell me, hey, don't go there, go there. There's something special, something you should see. Then I go there. So basically, where it takes me.
Oh, I see. That's cool. And do you also have planned rest pit stops and things like that? How do you plan that?
I'm not that good in planning. I
Right.
always have like one bottle of water with me. In Malaysia, for example, that almost got a problem because I was going for 30 kilometers, and I thought, okay, somewhere on the road there will be a gasoline station or something where I can get water, and there was absolutely nothing. And then like just after 25 kilometers, there was a small shop. They didn't accept my credit cards, so I was a little bit screwed for the moment, but it all turned out well so far. And yeah, as you also asked if about the physical thing about it, since I trained a lot in my former career, and it was really hard to maintain the motivation to do sports. And I still like to stay in shape. So this is like the best way also to trick my mind that I can do sport easier.
Right. So it's about teaching yourself endurance, right? And
As well, yeah.
uh, so uh, okay, well, just to stick with the documentary, I mean, so you uh, was there also like a camera team that was sort of following you around? I mean, because I would think that they would provide you, with food and water or something on the tour. But you also say that there's also vast stretches where you just go by yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, usually I don't have anyone with me. I do it with a GoPro, or I have a small drone with me, or just my mobile phone or a camera. And actually, all the footage you saw was filmed by me and cut by me. So yeah, I'm pretty much a one man show when I travel.
Oh wow, that's cool as well. I mean, and for like camera and everything. I mean, did you get any professional training, or you just pick up your smartphone and just hit the record?
YouTube made it possible. I just watched YouTube tutorials on video cutting and editing and everything. And yeah, I think you can almost learn anything with YouTube tutorials nowadays. I mean, stuff that is not that difficult.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I mean, also like in my end, I mean, when I started podcast, I think end of 2018, and I mean, I was struck. It was so simple to do it, right?
Yeah.
Because you just need a good recording software. So Zoom and Skype is usually the best for that. Um, and yeah, so and also in your travels, you also talk about like meeting local people and sort of seeing them up close, seeing the way how they live. Is there anything about your social encounters in your trips that you find very memorable? Maybe some anecdotes uh, you have.
Well, there were so many situations where or also countries where I thought like I'm maybe scared to go there, or everybody's telling me like don't go skating there, don't go outside alone, it's dangerous. And then when you are there, of course, you're also a little bit scared because you saw so much bad stuff on the news, you heard so many bad things. But when you experience it firsthand, usually it's completely different. So, for example, also, I don't know if you know the island of Langkawi. In
Oh,
it's
never
also in
heard of it.
Malaysia, and most people there are Muslims, and they follow their beliefs very strict. And I thought like, okay, it will be a bit tougher there to get around on skates, and I wanted to go to a cable car that is going up to a mountain, and there was something like a sky bridge. And I went there, and I had no shoes with me, nothing. So I got there, and behind the counter there were just some girls. How do you call it in English? The
The
you know,
hijab.
yeah, the hijab. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and completely covered. And I thought like, oh my god, how do I tell them now what I'm doing? I want to go up there with skates. Or I was sure, also from my experiences in Austria, if you try to enter whatever a sports stadium on inline skates, they will kick you out. You're not allowed to skate anywhere inside. And so I thought the same thing will happen there. And that girl asked me like where I come from, what I'm doing, and she was so interested in what I was doing, and they gave me a ticket. So I went to stand in the line and to get into the roller coaster. Is it called roller coaster? Like a skiing chairlift to get up on the mountain, a gondola. And there were like, I don't know, 30 or 40 people in front of me. And I got some yellow hand stripe band, whatever. And the guy recognized me and told me, hey, come here. And I thought, like, okay, now the mission is over. They sent me home with my skates because I had no shoes with me. But the girl found it so exciting what I was doing that she gave me like a VIP bracelet so I could pass everyone. I got into that gondola, went up the mountain, and I was allowed to skate on the sky bridge. And before I got there, I thought like, okay, this will be a mission impossible. And then it turned out completely different. And people there were way more open-minded than I expected, or than I would even expect here in Austria, Europe.
So right. So the main takeaway for you is that people are nice. I mean, strangers are nice. If you go out, then people will welcome you. And yeah, I mean, I've been watching not so much sports related things, but a lot of food
Yeah,
related videos. People, mostly Westerners, who travel to countries in Asia or in Africa, and Latin America, and it was also very striking. I mean, like how friendly people are, and even the travelers emphasize that, right? It's People are very open minded, and so that's a very great takeaway here.
yeah.
Um,
I think if you smile and you say hi, usually they already like you. And it's, yeah, I had a lot of prejudices before I went to some certain countries, and it always actually turned out completely different than I expected.
did you face certain language barriers? Because I must assume not everybody is well versed in English. So uh,
Of course, but usually, like by showing with the hands, you can get around anywhere in the world.
that's
So it never was a big deal actually, and no matter where I was, I think I always met someone who spoke at least a little English or a little French, so you can communicate anywhere.
okay. That's always helpful. It's always good to know. I mean, for people who want to be international travelers. Um, so now let's return to an earlier point, perhaps in your career. So once you finished, the secondary schooling, you were starting to become engaged in sports, and and that would be done through the Austrian military, right? Talk a little bit about, like, how you got into your shoes that you're wearing today,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Well, I started speed skating when I was 10 years old. And actually, that you get accepted by the army to be like a military sports professional, you already have to be on a quite top level. Let's say you have to be at least under the top sportsman in Austria, or at least close to the world class level that they accept you. So it's actually a quite cool thing because then you're in the Austrian army and they pay you to do sports. But you are a soldier, of course, but you're not doing what a soldier usually is doing. You're just training and representing Austria and the army.
So you didn't experience any drills, and you didn't have to stand stiff, and you didn't have your cupboard, with your clothes inspected and things like that.
We had that, but just for 5 weeks. And after it was over, and we could go back to training. But we had to do it as well. The same
Okay.
thing you experienced, probably, but the short version.
Yeah. That was a very notable experience. I mean, because if you live a very scholarly academic lifestyle, where you decide on your own what to do and what to wear and all these things, and then all of a sudden you have the an authority that breathes down your neck. It's a very strange experience. Um, but So you were training in inline skating, and then you also participated in championships as well.
Yeah, I took part in World Championships, European Championships, and World Cups, and I was Austrian state champion. So yeah, I was
And
mostly taking
and
part.
and for now, you have retired from that career,
Yes,
right?
I retired almost now 6 years ago. Yeah, it's pretty much 6 years ago, and I sometimes still miss it. But also skating, for me, it's good because when you finish your like professional sport career, for me at least, it was pretty tough because my biggest goal was to make it to the Olympics, and I retired 2 years before the Olympic cycle that I would be like probably have been in the best shape because of some injuries and sicknesses. And actually, I had no more fun in doing the sport. It was just torturing myself because I wanted to reach this one goal. So it was really hard for me mentally to retire. And I think what I'm doing now on inline skates is really also compensating what I'm missing, or it gives it a purpose. Because I mean, it's sad if you spend like 12 years and you train 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and then you just completely go away from the sport. So for me, it's really cool that I still can do something with what I learned for so many years, even though it's like in a complete different area today.
Right. So, what's a good retirement age for an inline skater? Because I know in soccer, which is of course, or football in Europe, which is usually the biggest and most common sports. Uh, you know, the professional players would stop around 34, 35, right, around mid 30s, because like the injury rate goes
Yeah.
up as you age, and also you get tired more easily. So. What's the age logic in your sports?
In short track speed skating, it's quite different because I think there are really just a few skaters left after they are behind the age of 30. So usually most skaters, I think, retire at 28, 29, some at already earlier. And especially, for example, the Koreans or Asian skaters, they are really good when they're still young. So they also usually retire earlier. I'm not sure if it's because of the pressure from the athletes who are younger in the next generation and already faster. But it's not a sport which you can do still with 35, or most people do with 35.
Right. So because yeah, it would be hard to sustain it because the younger people must assume they have more energy and they can sustain long workout regimes. Uh, so maybe we'll spend a little time on describing your daily life as a professional athlete. You say that you spend 6 to 7 hours a day training, and I mean, what does it take? Do you think to you could say mentally to sustain such a rigorous physical regime?
I think you absolutely need to want to reach that goal, that one goal. If you don't have that huge desire to make it to the Olympics, or I don't know, whatever your personal goal is, I think you have no chance to survive such a training regime. I mean, I spent almost a year in Latvia, and for me that was always the hardest training because the coach there was pretty strict, and also the like the hours we had to train in one day were the most. For example, during 1 week, the like real training time, and I don't count in like preparation or fixing the shoes or anything, was like 35 hours, like really training, doing something physically. So we got up at on the hardest days like at 6 in the morning, and then we did like some running and stretching for 45 minutes. Then we got to breakfast. Then usually we went on the ice for 2 hours. Then we had like a short lunch break. Then we had another, let's say, 1 hour cycling drill, another 1.5 hours of ice skating in the afternoon, and then maybe in the evening half hour swimming or something for regeneration. So the day was completely filled with training.
I mean, it's also interesting when you mentioned that swimming is regeneration because I mean I've been swimming, just casually, prior to the pandemic, and I felt it was like a real workout. It was a real exercise.
Yeah, no, it
Because
is. It is.
because I don't know. I mean, but I'm also not a professional athlete. I'm a professional academic, so
Yeah,
I spend most of my time in front of a computer screen and typing papers. It's a very uh, it's a physically more relaxed lifestyle, but then it's also harder to uh, to get up and exercise frequently because that's what you need to keep the energy level up, right? Um, but then for you, it was like all the time, go go go, right? Always very
yeah,
high
yeah.
intensity. But you say that it's by having the goal, right, of winning and prevailing in the championship that that gives you the motivation to succeed, right, and to work hard at it.
Yeah, I mean, at least it was this case for me. I'm not sure. Maybe there are a lot of athletes out who say, "Well, I can train that hard because for me it's just fun to do the sport." But I haven't met that many skaters that said, "Well, I train 4 times a day because I just like skating." Like everybody had some goal. For some, it was maybe to win an Olympic medal. For me, it was just to qualify to the Olympics.
I see. It also depends on the skill level, right? Because people are comparing themselves perhaps with the master class, you could say, of the sport. Um,
Absolutely, but that's an interesting thing because, of course, when you start the sport, your goal is not to win the Olympics. And what I found out in my career, like one day you will like kind of lose because your goals always get higher. With every success, your goals grow, and one day there probably will be a goal that you won't be able to reach. So yeah, that's mentally tough because you on one day you will have to deal with a loss.
and is that something that you experienced? Because you said that you retired a few years ago, and was there a moment where you saw an inflection point where you said, "Ah, okay, I cannot go up higher in the curve," right?
But for me, I was quite sure that I could make it to the Olympics, but it will be like a 50-50 chance, and I still need some luck to make it. And but I'm not sure. Like I don't know if I would have qualified for the Olympics. Maybe then my next goal would have been to win a medal, and I would be disappointed without making it. But yeah, who knows?
Yeah. So you mentioned also briefly your interaction with the other athletes, with the other skaters. You know, what's the, you could say, micro sociology behind those interactions? I mean, did you feel like it was a very supportive environment, that would you have lunch and dinner together with the other athletes, or is it very strictly competitive and all your friends are sort of non-athletes?
Well, it depends. For example, with the Latvians, I actually went to train there because of one guy. He's still one of my best friends. We have a call like every Sunday. And so he was my main training mate. And I would say that we were like brothers. We were spending every day from 8 in the morning till 10 in the evening, basically. But between most of the other skaters and me, there was a huge, how do you say it, uh,
Rivalry.
rivalry. Exactly. Thank you. Um, and especially, I could see that because I also trained in Hungary and I had an apartment there, and I was almost for 2 years training with the team there. And there, the rivalry was bigger, and I felt quite alone there because I also didn't speak Hungarian, and I always felt like the fifth tire of the car, like not really belonging to the squad, and that's also mentally quite tiring after some time.
Yeah, I mean, so how does you could say, your physical allocation into different spaces? I mean, how does that work? Meaning, why would you go to Hungary or Latvia? Like what's the logic behind these specific places?
Usually because of the teams, like because in training you still need someone to simulate that racing feeling, that you have someone in front who is fast, someone in the back who's fast. And in Austria we don't have that many good skaters that we can have the training level that high. And on the other hand side, we also didn't get that much time in the ice rink. Like I think 1 hour of ice training cost the club 300 euros or 200 euros, and they couldn't afford like more than 4 or 5 times training on ice per week, which is by far not enough to get to a top level. And nowadays it's even worse. So for me also that was a reason why I retired, because I wanted to be at least some time of the year in Austria. Because when, like as I told you, you're doing basically just the sport the whole day, and it's mentally also a bit tiring because you're not doing nothing intellectual. Like you can imagine if you're just doing work, if you're just working out and then you stare at the wall, and that's your daily routine, 365 days a year, it gets quite boring after some time. And there was no chance to do the sport in Austria on that level.
And so, while you were doing this very rigorous exercising regime, I mean, was it possible for you to do uh, anything else? I mean, or to have any, you could say, hobbies, activities on the side, or that's full commitment that you have as an athlete?
It was full commitment. Like I think my only hobby was skating, which is pretty much connected with ice skating. Um, there were not many hobbies, and I think there also was no space in my head for doing something else, because I was so driven that I have to reach those goals in sport that I always felt like if I waste 1 hour or 2 hour a day for something else, it might get me farther away from my goal.
Yeah. So, but that would, make me think about, your decision to retire. And so you say that it was injury related, right? So you couldn't
I
sustain.
think there were many factors in the end.
Uh,
Mostly, I had no more fun in doing it. And I understood that, okay, probably for more than 5 years before I made the decision, it started that I lost the joy in doing it. And it was pure,
it was a
uh,
chore.
yeah. And,
As
and I did it just out of ambition.
Yeah, and so, but what did it actually feel like? So, on the moment that you retired, and you then realized that you don't have to sustain the same rigorous exercise regime anymore. Like how did your, you could say, daily exercise regimen change once you retired? And how did you emotionally go through the fact that you didn't have higher goals to reach anymore?
Well, on the one hand side, especially for the moment, it was a complete relief. And I think I didn't even understand it in that moment that I retired now, because you have to imagine I was at home for 2 weeks. It was the end of the season. And then I've packed my bags again to go back to Hungary and to stay there for another 2 weeks, because actually like the season preparation started again. So I went there by train. I got to the ice rink. I went on the ice, and I also had some problems with my blades, and it always was quite a pain in the ass to have this, to have my boots and blades in the in a let's say as good that I can compete with the best athletes in the world. That always was an issue for me. I never felt like, I never really trusted my blades. It's the same in skiing, that they have like 100 pairs of skis, and for this mountain they take this ski, and for that kind of snow they take that. But whatever. So I went to the ice training, and after 30 minutes, I just went off the ice. I spoke to no one, went to the dressing room, took my stuff, went to McDonald's for the first time in 4 years, and took the train home. So it was a decision made in seconds, and I didn't think about it consciously before it. And yeah, then it took like some weeks to realize it, and then it was for some months pretty hard to have no goal. And I thought a lot about restarting my career, getting back to short track. I also got back, but just like a more ambitious hobby for another year. I participated one more time in European Championships, but actually I have retired at the day I went to McDonald's.
Mentally, you mean, right? So
Yeah,
you already checked out. You had sort of.
that moment was over. That was the moment where I said, okay, fuck this, I don't want to do this anymore.
Would you associate that feeling with relief, or was there some anxiety about, oh my God, what am I going to do next?
In that
Yeah,
moment, pure relief,
it's a relief. Yeah,
pure relief.
yeah, I see. So I mean, so you mentioned that you couldn't even read a book. You couldn't even entertain your mind elsewhere. But then,
It was not that bad. I mean, I've read some books, especially about economics. I was always a little interested in that, but I was like, not like a real hobby. I went to those airport bookstores and bought like Robert Kiyosaki books or stuff like that.
I read that too, the rich dad, poor dad thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, and by the way, he's a charlatan because he made most of his money by selling the book,
Yeah,
not by the real estate, which he said was going to make him rich, right? So,
I know.
uh, but anyway, s- so yeah, so that's a good transition to your, you could say, academic trajectory, because you went to Fachhochschule Wien, and then you got a BA and a master's degree. And so was your studies happening at the same time that you were doing your skating career? I mean, or was it afterwards?
Actually, I before I went to university, I already started my own business. Like I knew pretty fast after retiring that I don't want to have a 9 to 5 job, and that I want to run my own company or be at least independent. And yeah, I started with the sport magazine as an online magazine. I did some. I actually had some entrepreneurial ideas. One of them was that I offered training with professional athletes in their sport. We had like 10 Olympic participants, and you could go train with them. Like, for example, swimming with Olympic finalists, or you might would have liked to swim with an Olympic finalist, or you could do a badminton training with a world champion and stuff like that. But that didn't work out quite well, and there I found out, because we had like the best athletes of Austria, and when I tried to make marketing and advertise it, and I told people like, hey, we have like this guy, you can train with him, most people ask me like, who is that? And like, you could say that my bubble bursted, and I first like saw, hey, sport was really important for me, but 90% of the people I know in Austria, or I have to deal with in business, they don't care at all about sports, and they don't know those guys. Let's say I put on a podest, or like,
Pedestal, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Uh, so so you say that your impetus to found a sports magazine came from, you could say, bringing sports and athletes' experiences to the awareness of the Austrian public, right? Because
Yeah,
people are usually not that much interested in it. Um, and so maybe talk a little bit about the logistics of going through all of that, because there might be some other people who are very entrepreneurial driven, very curious, very interested, but uh, but then when they actually sit down and they're like, hey, actually I have to make a business plan, or I have to find investors, I have to find staff to help me set it up and all these things. So could you talk a little bit about the details of how to start a sports magazine?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I started it with a simple option. We actually first started with an online blog about those sports, and um, I think after a half year or 1 year doing it online, I saw that it got quite successful. People knew us, and then I just said, okay, hey, I want to do a print magazine. Like, why not? And the guys that did it at that time, we've said like, no, that's impossible. We can't do it. We can't get the advertisement, because I said we can't charge money for the magazine, because my goal is to make sports more known in Austria, or like make it more interesting, especially for people who don't care about sports. So how can I charge money from them for buying a magazine they are not interested in yet? So I said, okay, we have to finance it completely for advertisement and distribute it completely for free to the readers, so that it's lying everywhere in all like kind of sport facilities, schools, universities, companies, like where people get it who are already kind of interested in sports or not interested at all. And that's also how I kind of build up the most stories and interviews. I always wanted that the athletes like don't talk about, hey, this success was that way, and like that they share their emotions, like what's even the meaning of why they do it, or the sense of it, and that they share a bit more of their story, like a deep insight of why they are doing what they're doing, and for example what role money plays in their life. So a little bit philosophical maybe. I hope it makes sense what I say in English.
Right. So, and did you also have investors? I mean, were they helping you out, like a venture capital funding? That gets the thing kickstarted.
Not at all. I started with zero money, and I think I made the decision 2 months that we want to do a print magazine 2 months before the first issue date. And from that moment, I knew, okay, I have a huge pressure now, because I have to sell advertisement for at least 8,000 euros so that I could finance the printing costs. And then I just called companies, big insurance companies, Coca-Cola, and went to the like retrospective. I think I was super lucky that I even got connected with some of the marketing chiefs, and that I could walk up to them and I told them my idea and my story. And I think I was quite convincing, because I couldn't even show them like how it will look. I just told them like, hey, that's what I want to do. It maybe will look like this. Trust in me, give me your money. And it worked out.
Right. And also, like, once you convince one company to sponsor you, it helps you out with future sponsors too, right? So you can sort of say, hey, Coca-Cola or whatever, they gave me
Yeah,
money, so that means that I'm legit, right? So you can give me more money, right?
exactly. And our first like sponsor was Unica. Maybe you know it, like one of the biggest insurance companies of Austria. So that was quite a big deal. And the second advertiser was already Coca-Cola. So I was quite lucky.
Right. And right. So and what was the metric of success to you? I mean, so did you say, okay, so I'm going to print 5,000 copies of that first edition, right? And I want people to, I guess, take it home with them. What was the benchmark of success to you in that business?
Well, I guess that more and more people read the magazine and then get interested in sports. And I mean, I kind of felt it, because when I went to like to some business meetings or whatever, and they asked me like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I told them I'm publishing DailySports. They were like, "Ah, yeah, we know that sport magazine, we know it." That's happened just like after a year of doing it. But you also said like at the first time we did like 5,000 magazines, we actually started with 12,000. And for me, it was quite overwhelming when we got the magazines because I ordered them to one place and I could not imagine how big 12,000 magazines are, like how many they are. And you see it in front, it's like, oh shit, how do we distribute them now? And then till the end, we got to 20,000 copies. So yeah, but it's actually it's a tough question, like how we benchmark success. How would you benchmark success for a sport magazine?
Well, I mean, I guess it might be, yeah, the number of copies that you distribute. Um, but then also if there's feedback, right? So like, Leserbriefe is the German terminology. So usually letters that are sent
I,
from readers to the magazine. I mean, does that happen?
I think I had a good benchmark because in the beginning, of course, I mean, I knew some sportsmen from the army, but the top athletes that earn a lot of money, they are not in the sports army, of course. And over the like say after the third, fourth magazine, more and more sportsmen came to us and asked like, "Hey, can you write a story about us? Can we be in your magazine?" And I got to bigger and bigger sportsmen. I got invited to MotoGP races and like to big sport events like Formula One races. So I think that's a good benchmark.
Yeah, and well, could you talk a little bit about, I mean, how these interactions work? So let's say you get invited to the Formula One, and there's some athlete or maybe some representative that greets you there, and then you uh, basically follow him around during training and also during the actual event, and you interview that person.
Mostly I got like, for example, MotoGP. It's super hard to get an interview there, and all journalists, also from like the biggest international media houses, they have to schedule like their 10-minute spot that they can talk to an athlete with. And it was funny because I also like just got 10 minutes, or the athletes even told me before we started, okay, you get 5 minutes. And sometimes then the interview took like 1 hour because I felt, or I think like that approach I made interviews with them was quite different than they're usually getting interviewed. I didn't ask the questions they usually get asked. And I think they also found it quite interesting to talk with me about other things. And so I think our the qualities of our interviews was quite good from that point of view, that also the athletes really like to talk and to talk about different matters and issues that a random sport journalist probably wouldn't ask.
Right. So I guess the secret to good sports journalism is to get the athletes to open up to you and maybe tell
Yeah,
the story, tell the motivation. Why did they go into the sports? And
which
um,
is always hard when you are at a competition or like in their closed environment. For me, I always like the most when, I don't know, I got in touch with an athlete and asked like, "Hey, where are you right now? What are you doing for training? Do you have like 1 or 2 hours time in between? Can we meet alone over there without a PR manager or whatever?" And then usually when they take the time and they already know, okay, we have to spend some time together, then usually the good stuff happens. And also, you need like they need to trust you. I mean, you meet them usually for the first time, and then you ask that guy very personal questions, and they need to trust you to a point that you also don't use everything they tell you. I think I could destroy some athlete careers if I would tell anything they told me, and I guess I always had a good feeling for what I should write, how I should write, and what I leave out, because I think that's a big problem of especially printed media, that I can write exactly what the athlete said, but when it's written and you read it, it has a completely different meaning than the athlete meant it. And a lot of athletes got into trouble for some things they said, but meant completely different. And I always try to understand what they really mean and then tell it in a way that also other people can understand what they want to say.
And so that's a very good skill to have. But do you think that it's necessary to be an athlete yourself? I mean, as you had been, to sort of put yourself into the shoes of that athlete who's telling you the story, right?
It
You have
probably
some
helps.
empathy.
It probably helps. Yeah. Also, if you tell the athletes, "Hey, I did this and that," and we are like on a similar, not on a similar level, but like when you talk with them, I think they kind of feel that you understand them and you know what they are going through in some perspectives. I mean, I never went through earning that much money that I don't know for what I should spend it. Like some of the athletes I interviewed, some of them are millionaires, and but still, I think it helps definitely.
Yeah. So you also say that it's important to establish rapport with the athletes, meaning you have to say certain things to get them to open up. Like, do you go in with like an interview guide? Like, do you have a clear sense of, okay, I want to know these three things about the athlete, right? And then I'm going to report on that in my writing.
Yeah, usually I just started talking with them about anything, and I think that the person you interview opens up, you have to open up yourself. Like I always told them like some stories from me or stuff that I experienced that I probably wouldn't tell in the public. And then they started to open up, and then I had like I think always my 10 most important questions that I definitely wanted to know, but I actually never sticked to the questions that I want to ask. Because then you hear something, they tell you an interesting story, and you spend a lot of time on that matter. And or like mostly when I tried to find out what questions I want to ask them, I was researching on the internet, like what they already said in other interviews. But thank God I always found out more things than I could read in other interviews. So they were pretty different. And my questions got different during the interview.
Right. So it's basically you react on the spot.
Yeah, you have to.
Right. That's always good. Yeah. So the magazine is, you could say, a big, you know personal part of your success. And wh- so you have founded it, like, 6 7 years ago, right?
Yeah, I think six,
Yeah.
yeah, 7 years ago.
And where do you see, you could say, the future of sports journalism? Like, where do you think you want to take your magazine? Do you have any, you could say, mentoring advice to other sports journalists who are also keen on doing that?
That's a really tough question since the whole media world is changing so rapid, and actually especially printing magazines or old medias are getting harder and harder to finance them. And I actually did or published the last magazine in January, and then COVID-19 came, and I decided already in the beginning of March that I won't publish another issue, like because I think the date that it should get issued was in the end of March, and I don't know, I thought already quite early this will get pretty bad, and I won't find finance, or I won't be able to finance it. So I have no idea where this whole thing is going, and especially with COVID-19, when it will be possible to finance a print magazine again. Um, so I would like to change more also to like what we're doing now, online podcasts, videos. I actually recorded almost all the interviews on camera, but um, I didn't publish many of them because I would need to cut out a lot of stuff that I was talking with the athlete that was confidential. So I still don't know where this whole thing is going. Maybe um, I'm developing myself to a completely or into a complete different direction. I'm not sure if I even will do the sport magazine in the future. It's like everything written in the stars because it was, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Hard to say.
Yeah, I mean
What do you,
that's
where it's going?
yeah, that's actually not a very motivating story for the
Sorry.
aspiring sports journalists, um, because so because I know that even in the U.S. here, I mean, journalism is under challenge, and as you mentioned, there's been a big shift from print to online medium, and and then recently I was reading about layoffs at BuzzFeed, which is a purely online, journalistic outlet, and they were basically uh, their whole financing strategy was to do advertising on social media, right, Facebook and Twitter, uh, and the problem is that social media itself is a very unstable source of revenue, right? So because if Mark Zuckerberg decides that the algorithm should feed you with I don't know, conspiracy theories about politics or something, right, rather than news uh, articles, uh, then it means that your articles are going to be seen less by the public. So less click rates, less advertising revenue, and so forth. Um, and it seems like the only successful journalistic outlets we have today, uh, it's a handful of big papers. Like I don't know whether you followed like Washington Post, which is one of the big newspapers in our country, was bought by Jeff Bezos, who's of course I think the second richest guy after Elon
Not
Musk
a
now.
good sign on my.
Uh, yeah, right. So uh, and and then also the LA Times, which was purchased by Patrick Soon-Shiong. He's a like a billionaire investor in pharmaceutical products, I think. Um, and then also the New York Times does really well because they're like an established uh, print source, and they sell online subscriptions for I think $3 per subscriber, and they surprisingly have a lot of subscribers because they have a big name recognition, right?
Mm,
Um, while at the same time you have the local newspapers that are all shutting down, right? Because as we said, there's not enough revenue money. So, um, like, have you thought about this like big shift in like the media business, and what does it mean to
it's
journalism?
it's actually quite sad and scary because I think real journalism is getting less and less. And for me, it's interesting because I'm part of the Austrian Sport Journalism Federation, and I actually never claimed that I'm a journalist because if you want to be a journalist, you have to be as objective as possible. And I'm not objective. And I actually only write positive about athletes. That also happened because I tried to help some athletes. And for example, in Austria, I wrote some negative articles about the swimming federation. And this backfired quite hard, and the political pressure got quite big. And they let me know that if I want to continue to do it that way, they will ruin me. And they could definitely ruin me. So I decided, okay, because it was like investigative journalism on a low level, and the pressure I got already on that level, and we're talking about sports, not about politics or economics, was quite big. And I was like scared that they will, let's say, at least destroy me and that I won't have a chance to do the magazine. So I decided, okay, I try to make a magazine with which I inspire people because I can't find a solution for those big problems or do investigative journalism. And I think all those things are getting big problems in all areas of journalism. Also, like political correctness is a problem. I feel like you have to take care for everything you say. If you don't gender right in Austria, it's already a problem. Then message control is a big problem. And you said that most companies, they spend their marketing budget on Facebook. And I see the same thing, like that athletes, they have their managers and they don't do interviews anymore, or less and less, because they say, okay, you want an interview about which topic? Okay, we send you the interview. And then I get like some prepared lines that are already corrected, and there are absolutely no more emotions in it. So even I get bored when I read what I get sent when this happens. And then it also happens, but that just occurred in the last 2 or 3 years, that I ask if we can do an interview, and they say, yeah, you can do an interview, but it costs money. And yeah, this is altogether, this is a pretty bad direction for objective journalism. And I don't know, most big news outlets, I don't think that they are, how do you say that? I don't want to say fake news or anything, but I think people have to understand that if they watch CNN or Fox News, it's entertaining or entertainment and not news anymore that much,
Right.
on
It
my
was
opinion.
it's infotainment. I think that's how
Yeah,
it's been
yeah,
called. And also on this last point about having to pay athletes to get access to them. Uh, you know, I think that would be very bad journalistic practice. I mean, I know that. I mean, I'm not a journalist myself, but I've listened to a lot of journalists and interviews and so forth, and they generally have the consensus that paying interviewees is a very bad idea. You should always get the source free, because you know uh, like there shouldn't be any, you could say, undue influence uh, on, you could say, the journalistic product, right?
yeah,
Because if it's like a paid promotion, right, then am I still like an objective journalist? Am I still objective newspaper and so forth? And there are big ethical questions involved there, more than the economic cost.
yeah.
Um,
And it's
so
absolutely hard to be objective if you have to finance yourself through advertisement or whatever. Like, you will always step someone on the feet.
yeah, and also know that in authoritarian countries, like I saw a news report about Hungary, and there's this one governing party, the Fidesz party, which has been in control for the last 10 years, and they have control over a lot of sectors in society, in Hungarian society, but one of which is journalism, right?
Yeah,
And the way how they would do it is by controlling the subsidies, because the government gives money to the press foundation, and then
yeah,
the press foundation gives the money to the newspapers, usually in the form of advertising. And the way how you would kill uh, opposition journalism is by not giving them money, right? So and then you sort of but and then it's also very interesting, because now the European Union is giving pressure on Hungary, because of rule of law violations and so forth. And so what the Hungarian government does is they would fund, let's say, one journalistic outlet which criticizes the government, right? And then they can point to that and they say, hey, look, we're freedom loving and democratic
yeah,
kind of thing.
exactly.
But,
Yeah, it's tough times. I'm also not sure what I should think about that Twitter, or now in Austria, YouTube did it with a politician that they just deleted their content or blocked them. And I mean, even if I don't like what they say, I'm not sure if that's a good way that those companies have so much power that they can decide what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it might. So I saw this interview with Andrew Yang. He ran for president here, and also he's going to run for mayor of New York, which is the biggest city in our country. And so his recent proposal was to have kind of like a council, of government representatives, media journalists, and also the technology companies, and they should sit together, and they should together determine guidelines
Mhm.
on whom to block and ban, if that is what they want to do, right? Because right now the decision to ban is entirely with the technology companies.
Yeah,
And I mean, it might not even be like Jack Dorsey himself. I mean, it's probably some people below him who, believe in a particular political ideology, and then they're like, oh my God, that person has the opposite ideology. I want to prohibit that now, right? So,
yeah,
um, something like that would make sense, right? To have, you could say, all the like opinion representatives around the table, and then they should come up with some kind of guideline or solution to this, right? um, would be much better than giving all the power to a few actors in the technology companies.
yeah,
uh,
definitely.
yeah. So yeah, but that's sort of like a solution that we have to sort of yeah, I don't know, fight for.
Well,
uh,
I don't know if it's still contemporary, but I really like the quote of Voltaire where he's saying, like, I hate what you say, but I would give my life that you are able to say what you want to say.
yeah, yeah.
Freedom of speech, yeah.
Yeah, freedom of speech is an important piece. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's even more strongly defined in the US, because I mean, in Austria and Germany, because of the Nazi history, right? So you can't necessarily say anything that
Yeah,
will approve of Nazism, or denying Holocaust and so forth. Um, you know, but I think in the U.S. there's still a grander commitment, because we didn't have that particular history, right? So I think this idea of like retaining freedom of speech is very important, because one thing I'm concerned about is, if people with extreme views, including hateful views, are not able to say them openly, then they will find other platforms to do it. And in those other platforms, they might actually be inciting violence, right? So, there are certain platforms where right wing nationalists in the US were able to, talk. And I think that's also a part of the story of why we had the storming of the Capitol, right?
yeah.
Last 2 weeks ago, I think. Um, so um, so I think, yeah, it's important to have some, to retain some public sphere. Uh, yeah. But okay, but you mentioned the difficulties that you've had with COVID now, with the pandemic. Um, and yeah, I mean, like, what have you been doing basically this past year? And is it been like a contemplative moment for you about what you want to do in life? I mean, or in the future?
Well, so many big projects changed. I had huge plans for this year. I actually wanted to do a short documentary for the Austrian television on skates and also off skates about Iran. And I'm really sad that I couldn't do it. And I'm scared that the United States will attack Iran before I will be possible to go there and see it without a war. I hope it won't happen, but yeah, only the future will say or will tell. Um, then I had another project. I actually learned skydiving 1.5 years ago, and I wanted to skate out of the back of a military airplane, or a cargo airplane, and land on skates. So I did that, and I wanted to do like a promotion video together with sponsors like Breitling. That was a huge project I actually wanted to do, or I want to do this summer. I'm not sure if it's going to happen. We'll see, but I still try to do it. And yeah, I wanted to continue traveling and do more documentaries about other countries, especially about countries that we have a lot of prejudices. Because I picked Iran because I think no matter if you ask people on the street in the US or in Europe and you ask them, like, hey, what do you think about Iran? I think what they tell you will be so different than what you experience when you're there. Like, I think most people when they hear Iran, they think of desert, jihadists, and war, and that's it. But that you can go skiing there, that you have nature. Like, I think also from like a perspective of nature, I think it's one of the most um, how do you say, adverse countries in the world.
Diverse.
Yeah, diverse countries in the world. Yeah, it offers so much. Like, you even can find a cheetah there in the desert. So yeah, I want to show countries like this where the prejudice are the biggest. And
Yeah, yeah. I've watched food videos about Iran, and it was absolutely incredible. I mean, so first of all, I mean, of course, great food, right? I mean, lamb kubide and putting sumac on everything. Um, but then also, yeah, the friendliness that you can feel from the people there, um, because the prejudice that you would get, as you said, is like, oh, these are aggressive people, and
yeah,
we have to fear them, etc. But and they would also hate, especially Americans. Americans are very scared of going there. Um, in some cases, I mean, bad things have happened. I mean, we have one of our PhD students. He's a history student. He went to Iran, and then he was imprisoned for 3 years, I think, uh, mainly because he was a U.S. citizen and he was doing research in an archive, right? But it wasn't anything related to the current, you could say, government.
mm,
Um, but it might have something to do with retaliating against Americans because
yeah.
you have the sanctions regime that is being restored. Um, so a
And
lot of it is to do with politics, right? It's not with culture.
also the actions of the government, I think, usually don't show how the population is there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it's a population that tends to be very open-minded, and so yeah. I mean, I hope you'll be able to go there and explore the local scenery there, and yeah. So I think you have a lot of good projects that in the future. So I think these are all the questions I have. Yeah. So do you want to ask me something? I mean, or you want to
Actually, I have some questions. How do you think will the politics turn out now in the US with Joe Biden? Do you think it will get better? Do you think it will get worse? Will we see a war with Iran, or
uh,
where do you think is this all leading to?
so I think with regard to Iran issue, it's actually going to be better because Biden announced that there's going to be a restoration of relations, a rejoining of the nuclear deal, that was signed in 2015. It's a little bit more difficult than back then because Iran has been able to accumulate nuclear material to levels that would, you know, allow them to build nuclear weapons. But I still think, I mean, it's possible to go back. I mean, now that the Iranian government has seen that there's a new administration coming in, they have said themselves, we're going to give Biden time until February to rejoin the nuclear deal, and then we're able to, at least bring that particular conflict to an end. Um, the strategy of the Trump administration uh, has been to not only apply maximum pressure on Iran, but also to, you could say, bring the other powers in the region closer together. So it's Saudi Arabia and Israel are the major two allies of the U.S. And recently there have been a lot of agreements passed between uh, various Middle East countries, especially Muslim countries, with Israel. And this is all done. Um, I would say it has to do with power politics, right? It's about trying to, build a coalition that goes against Iran, and also it's about consolidating, the various regimes in the Middle East. I don't know whether you follow the stuff in Saudi Arabia, right? There was the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, he's a Saudi journalist in the U.S. Uh, and there's also been power consolidation among Mohammed bin Salman, who's the crown prince in Saudi Arabia. Um, so the Middle East will remain a very tense region, and that's going to be for any administration. Generally, the Europeans pay a higher price for political instability in the Middle East. Because I mean, we saw that like a few years ago with the refugees from Syria and in Iraq and all these places. Um, and but I mean, it's definitely true that we need to have the U.S. on the side of, you could say, reason, right? Like not inflaming the tensions in the region more than should be. Um, the So from a foreign policy perspective, I think the biggest concern that the U.S. has is going to be China. I mean, we've seen that build up over the last, uh, you could say, 10 years or so, um, because the Chinese developmental model, is based on export of manufacturing products to the U.S. And most recently, it has been to develop technological capacity. So you see all these companies like Alibaba and Tencent, and they're trying to emulate and surpass the U.S. in technological capability. And you see, from the U.S. perspective, they think it's not acceptable, right? So because they felt like, well, we were the ones who created the internet. We created
Yeah.
Microsoft and Google and Apple and so forth. And almost every country in the world uh, embraces that framework, right? So even the Europeans are using Google and Facebook and so forth. Um, and China is the only country that try to set up their own technological infrastructure, which the government of China can control more closely. So I followed with interest like the meeting between the U.S. Secretary of State going into Austria, and he told the Austrian Chancellor uh, to not allow Huawei
Yeah.
to enter the country to do the technology rollout. Uh, what's the latest thing on that? I mean, they did allow the Huawei to come in, right?
We have Huawei here and you can buy cell phones from them, but since you cannot use Google applications on the Huawei phones, I think for most people they're pretty useless right now. I
I
mean, you
see.
can install anything from Google.
Well, but what about this 5G network? I mean, are you from there? If you were to use that infrastructure, are you able to access Google services?
To be honest, I'm not up to date on this issue, but I think you are actually.
Yeah, because I mean that's the main thing, right? So you have, I think, uh, Sony Ericsson or just some Finnish company.
Nokia is,
No,
I think.
Nokia is the one that provides 5G. Um, and yeah, so there's this competition that might be going on, but then for many countries in Europe, they say, well, if Huawei does it cheaper and quicker,
Mm,
then why don't we go and use their platform?
yeah,
Um, and but it clashes with the politics because the Americans say no, 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 you have to you have to use our product,
yeah.
and so that is the major rivalry I think in global politics that I mean it matters right now, and I think it's going to matter in the coming years. And so the and then so in domestic policy, I mean the major issue that we see in the U.S. I mean, like you saw it reported, right? We had the big Capitol riot. Um, now they pulled in the military to watch over the inauguration of the President Biden, and I mean, the signal that is being sent to the world, I think it's a very bad one, right? Which is that if you have democratic elections, um, which were free and fair, and then one side of the political spectrum says that this was not really democratic, right? This was not fair at all. Um, it sets a very, very bad precedent, I think.
Yeah.
Big because if you do, so if people so let's say if most of the Trump voters, I'd say maybe 2/3 of the Trump voters, do not have faith in the democratic elections, then they're gonna next time they will want violence. They want sort of a civil war. I mean, they want more escalation, basically, right?
Mm,
Because you no longer have faith in the procedures, um, and so I would say that. So I hope it doesn't happen again, but I'm concerned that it will happen again within the next maybe 10 years, even. Um, I mean, I would say Trump is an incompetent fascist because because it's not enough to have you could say a violent mob supporting you, right?
yeah.
Like if you really wanted to be a fascist ruler, you have to bring the military on your side, and and of course a big part of the political factions. Um, that's what Hitler did, right? I mean, he got a lot of votes in the democratic elections. He had support from the conservative and centrist parties, and also he had a very loyal military force.
Yeah,
Uh,
basically he built them up himself.
yeah,
Like,
is yeah. There was well, there was the Wehrmacht, and then also there was the SS and the SA, right? So these are
yeah.
you could say, the
There were people at the
stormtroopers.
time actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that that would be the recipe for a real fascist. No, Trump didn't have it, right? He's not competent in that sense.
Thank God.
Fortunately for the country, uh, and yeah, so we hope that doesn't happen again. But I'm very concerned it will happen again. So what we need is, and this is not just in America. I think in Europe, uh, there's the same questions that exist, which is, what do we have to give to people that feel like that they're the losers of globalization? So, anybody who votes for the FPO, which the Freedom Party, which is the right-leaning party in Austria, um, or AfD in Germany, or Front National in France, all of these voters, they feel like that they're the losers
Mm.
of the this I guess you could call it globalization, right? But basically it's like a set of policies that exist that result in declining demand for less skilled, less educated workers,
Yeah.
um, and then even those who are like high skilled with a lot of qualifications. I mean, even somebody like myself with a PhD. I mean, we don't think that. I mean, we might get jobs, but not all of us get the sort of the cushy high level
Yeah.
jobs because there's just not enough of them. And so that's going to create massive amount of anger.
Mm.
And so we in the social sciences, I think we have a responsibility. We have to sort of point out, okay, what can we do, right? So I published a book. It's a co-edited volume, with Dr. Richard Caputo and others, where we looked at universal basic income. Um, and I know there's also Austrian researchers, and I actually interviewed a UBI activist in Vienna. Uh, and we're trying to, yeah, basically come up with this plan to say we give a basic income to everybody. It's not going to solve all of the problems, right? Because there's basic issues about dignity of work,
Mm.
like having a job that pays a middle class wage. Um, so it doesn't give back all of that. Um, but at least it allows you to have like a basic footing,
Yeah.
and then you can build on top of that. So I mean, even in your own case, right? Like when you were founding your sports magazine, like did you think that like having some basic income or like some uh, stable source of revenue, I mean, would that have helped you in starting that business, right?
Probably would have helped. I think it maybe also takes a little bit away the pressure, which maybe can have a positive, but also maybe have a negative effect because I feel like the more pressure I have, the better I perform. And I, of course, had the huge pressure that I finance my life and also the magazine. So, or it was interesting. I always managed to finance the magazine. And when I reached the goal, I almost made no more sales. And I think that was like also connected to my inner motivation and also the pressure that came from outside or that I built up myself. And I one time had a professor of my university. He asked me if he can invest into the sport magazine. And I was really interested in this opportunity. and he told me like he wants to buy 5 to 10%, and he would give me 15,000 euros. And I actually asked him, okay, what am I going to do with those 15,000 euros? Like, if he has any idea what I can do with that money that solves my future problems. And in the end, I didn't take the money because I was scared that I take the money, I lose the pressure in getting advertising, and that in the end, after like 3 or 4 more magazines, I spent the 15,000 euros for printing costs or whatever, and I would relax a little bit more. And I would have given away some percents of my company, and the money would be gone too. And I think in the end, it would have turned out that way. So the question is always, is it meaningful what you're doing? Is it I'm not really not 100% sure about the universe basic income. I think that we need something like it, but I don't know what it will do from a psychological point of view. But I mean, I've heard so many different opportunities about it. And the latest I heard was the one from Jordan Peterson. I'm sure you know him.
Yes, he's a Canadian psychologist.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it would be necessary, especially since the distribution of wealth is so huge and the gaps between rich and poor is getting bigger and bigger. Something has to be done.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, that's also a major motivator because, you know, it was the economist Joseph Stiglitz, and he pointed out that it doesn't take a lot of money to help, poor people, because, it's like there's certain investments that pay off massively. Like, for instance, if we go into, a low income village in, Africa or something like that, uh, and a lot of these kids are struggling in school, and a big part of the reason is that, poor vision, right? So they don't have eyeglasses. So then if you invest in, you know eyeglasses, and then all of a sudden these kids can see, and then they can pay attention in class, and then the performance in school gets better, and then, they might be able to become professionals and doctors and
Yeah,
so forth. And so it's very amazing. It's like a relatively low cost investment, and then it makes such a big difference. I mean, there was
yeah.
another example I saw. I think it was like in a German newspaper. I saw it was an article about bicycles.
Mhm.
Again, it's a low income country, and just by, I guess it's some NGO which funded the bicycles, and they gave them to the villagers. Um, and the difference was so huge. I mean, the productivity of that, village went up massively because it takes them less time to go to work, and to fetch the water from the fountain and all these things.
Maybe get
Um,
access to education with a bike.
exactly. Yeah. Also, yeah, because the schools might be far away from the village, and then if they can bike to school, like all these things, like we wouldn't have thought about that. Like small investments, and they make such a huge difference, right? And I think that's the logic also with basic income. I
Mhm.
mean, one of my favorite studies was done by um, like a low income association in India, and they organized the basic income trial, and they followed like a village, and saw what happened when people are given money. And what's very interesting is that all of the social indicators went in the right direction, right? So, the crime rate goes down, the literacy rate goes up, the health improved, everything, entrepreneurship increased, right? Because people actually had money to invest in starting a business. Um, and there was only one group that was losing during that basic income trial, and those are the money lenders. Because the local money lenders, so
Yeah.
usually what would happen is that so if the villagers, like let's say if there's a drought, so they cannot sell the crops because the crops are destroyed. So how do you feed yourself? Well, you go to the money lender, and then he gives you a loan for like, I don't know, 10% daily interest or something like
Yeah.
that, right?
With
Uh, and
feedback.
right, and then you have to of course pay that back. And then what happens is that with the basic income trial, the people had the cash, so they didn't have to go to the money lender, right? So that guy was a loser
Hmm.
in that basic income trial. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, actually, that's not so bad, right?
That's not absolutely not bad. No.
Maybe we should squeeze out the money lender. So
I think it really is as you said, probably it depends a lot on how big the universal income is. Like, how much money do you give people? Is it that much money that like you don't have to do anything anymore for your like daily living, and you take away the whole motivation, or it even motivates people more and it makes it easier for them to do whatever they want to do with the money. And then again, that's what I wanted to say before, like, is it meaningful? Like, because if you give more money to people and they just waste it for consuming, I don't know, more clothes, more stuff, more shit that nobody needs, then I guess with especially with an environmental perspective on the planet right now, it could be bad for the whole planet. I don't know.
well, I mean, actually, I don't think that people are going to be consuming, shit like crazy. I think because so it's under the contemporary capitalistic arrangement
Yeah.
that people consume shit like crazy. So because people are, let's say, if they're working at banking, finance, consulting, these are the high income jobs in our economy, right?
Yeah.
And then because a lot of people feel that this job is very depressing, so as a way to compensate for that, you could say depression, they go out and they buy more stuff that they
Yeah.
don't need, right? While I think that in the basic income world, let's say you have a lot of young people and they say, well, actually, I don't have to work for these, whatever banks and so forth. I can just take it easy. I can maybe start my own sports magazine, maybe,
Yeah.
or something like that. And they might be actually less inclined to be crazy consumerists. They might be more creative. Uh, and creativity, I mean, like, if I produce music, or if I'm like a hobby athlete, or if I'm a hobby painter, what's my negative environmental impact of doing that? I would say very little, right?
Absolutely true. And as an athlete, universal income would have been perfect for me. Actually, the like being an army sportsman was like a universal income for me, kind
Right.
of.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's right. So you had a guaranteed source
Yeah,
of funding, so what it allowed you to do is to focus completely on the sport, right?
exactly.
Rather
Which
than
I couldn't
saying,
do if I get this funding, which is like a universal income in my small world.
right. So yeah, so there definitely are the benefits there of trying a universal basic income, and people report positive experiences. Because you see, so it goes back to our early discussion about hate speech and political correctness and censorship and all these things. Because the one thing that we're confused about today is why is it that so many people are angry, right?
Yeah,
And what I would say as a social scientist is, I think part of the reason is that people don't have a secure sense of identity, and they can't have it because there's no economic certitude, right?
mhm,
Like there isn't this belief that I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna do okay.
Yeah,
Uh, and you see, the world that we live in today, none of our ancestors had to go through that because in the old days, people knew what they were gonna do. Like in most cases, I mean, if your dad was a farmer, then you're gonna do the same thing, right?
yeah,
You're gonna be farming land. Now the problem today is that most people don't live on farms anymore. So you live in a city, so you have to work a job or you have to start a business. But then the job or the business, it might be destroyed because, as you said, with COVID, it's like, oh my God, I can't do
yeah.
my business anymore, right? Or my job gets laid off, right? So we basically put people into a world that is richer economically, right? We've never been as rich as we
Yeah.
have been today, but at the same time, less certain. And less certain, I mean, that's a very bad thing. I mean, I think it's a very anti-human and unnatural thing,
Yeah.
to put sort of a gun to your head and say, hey, you got to produce, you got to sell. Um, and but I don't know. I mean, but your reasoning is also very sound. I mean, you say, well, actually, I want to have the pressure to survive.
But not kind of this pressure, because this uncertainty is also really bad for me, because I mean I plan some things, but now I have no idea if I can do the stuff that I want to do. So this, I think that uncertainty is really bad. To
Mm.
have a pressure in some way can be good. Like, I know the rules, I can print a magazine, and I know the rule is I have to sell to survive, kind of. But now I don't know what the rule is to print a magazine, because I don't know how I should finance it. And I don't know if I can publish it in 1 or 2 months, because I don't know if there will be a lockdown or no lockdown, if we find a treatment for COVID 19, if the vaccines will work, how long will they work, will the virus mutate? And this uncertainty is really bad.
Right. Which one thing that's very interesting. So we had a candidate, Andrew Yang. I referred to him earlier. Running for president, now running for mayor, and so he started his campaign before the pandemic, right? And he said, we have to have universal basic income because of technology taking jobs. But at that time, before the pandemic, people were kind of either laughing at him or they were ignoring him, right? And then all of a sudden the pandemic hits, and then the first thing we did, I think it was in April last year, there was a stimulus package in Congress, and they said $1,200 in stimulus checks, which is it's the same function as a basic income because you give
Yeah,
it to, I think, the bottom 75% of the income distribution. And now we said 600, and then now uh, there's going to be another maybe $1,400 of stimulus. Um, and that was like a bipartisan measure. So it's both the Democratic and the Republican parties voted in favor of the stimulus check. And yeah, so I think that's really interesting, right? Because there's this one event
will
that
change
was
everything.
it changes everything, and then after this pandemic is over, I mean, I'm really curious to see what's going to happen. I mean, in terms of the healthcare system, because so we don't have a system like in Austria, right? Like where you
Yeah,
cover everybody under the insurance plan. We sort of have an ad hoc approach. Some people get government insurance, most people have private insurance, some people have no insurance. I hope that with the pandemic, people are going to say, well, actually, we should try a European healthcare system in
yeah,
America, and also stimulus, right? I mean, maybe we should try a basic income program somewhere, right? And in Europe, there might be similar discussions about that. So,
I agree.
um, yeah, so hopefully there's some good things that come out of the situation.
What do you think? What are the most positive things happening right now, like on a global scene, and what are you concerned most of?
What am I concerned about in the global picture? So, I mean, we spoke about the situation in the Middle East. We spoke about China and
Yeah,
US. Um, and so, like, do you know Noam Chomsky? He's a
yeah,
famous linguist, and he's now in Arizona. And he said the two biggest concerns that he has uh, is nuclear war and climate change.
hmm,
Because so with nuclear war, it's a big question. So because nuclear technology is getting better at the margins. So what that means is that you could put an atomic bomb into a backpack.
yeah,
So you can have like this one terrorist who goes around and then just detonates it. Um, that's extremely scary, and we must, um, you could say, make it impossible to, basically develop this kind of technology further. I don't think anybody should have these kinds of nuclear weapons. Um, so we should do the most prudent thing to control that. Um, but I think the bigger concern has to do with the climate. I mean, I don't know whether you saw like a couple of days ago. There was a summary of like the 2020 weather, and it was tied with 2016 as being the hottest year on record. Um, and and then if you see the graph that's produced by the IPCC, the climate change panel, where like we were born like in the early 1990s, right? So right around that period, you saw that the
yeah,
curve was going up pretty drastically. Um, and I would say up until around the time that we were born, you could maybe have said, like it's not going to be that bad, right? Um, but now, about 30 years on, I mean, we know it is really bad, and we're driving off in the direction that gets even worse, because it just like the climbing curve is going upwards,
yeah.
and there is no end to it. And so I'm extremely concerned about the climate change, and the fact that we aren't doing enough about it. Because so I mean, a big part of what I study in my field is, you could say, the dynamics of the capitalist economy, right?
Mhm.
And there was this historical sociologist. His name is Michael Mann. He teaches at UCLA in Los Angeles, and he says that like there's an unholy alliance between capitalism, consumerism, and climate change.
Mhm.
So that each of these factors, they're sort of reinforcing each other, right? Because any government, like if you interview Joe Biden or Sebastian Kurz or anybody, and you ask them, well, what do you think is the most important objective for your government? And they will say,
Growth of economy.
exactly, economic growth. I mean, that is the thing. Like they will agree on that totally, because they know that all the systems that they build up, like,
Only work on growth.
yeah, welfare state, pensions,
Yeah,
the national debt, all of these things are funded by economic growth. And then that's a problem, because economic growth always means that you have to suck resources from the planet in
yeah.
some way, right? um, and now then there's some of the growth optimists who say that, well, if you look at Scandinavia, CO2 is down, economic growth is up. um, it's still not complete accounting in my view, because a lot of Western countries, they import goods
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Asia, right? So you produce stuff in Asia, and actually, if you go to, uh, I mean, I think in China, I mean, one of the biggest concerns that they have is air pollution,
yeah.
because the factories are using coal plants, and and I mean, I have a lot of like, Chinese roommates here, and they're coughing all the time. Some of them are not even smokers, and you're like, well, where does that come from, right?
Yeah.
And it's because the air that they're breathing at home is so bad, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then so if the sneakers that you're wearing is made in China, I mean, of course, the CO2 statistic will say, your own CO2 is very low, right? Uh, but you know, but you're still contributing to climate change, right? Indirectly.
And
Um,
imagine that like 8 billion people would have the Scandinavian lifestyle. I mean, whole Africa doesn't even, or most people in Africa don't even have a fridge or air conditioner. Or imagine they get to a Scandinavian lifestyle, what that means for the resources of the planet. And tell them that, like, why shouldn't they have it? What gives us the right to say, hey, you're in India or Africa, you can't have the Scandinavian lifestyle because we are running out of resources. So
yeah. So
that's a
I
problem.
yeah, so I wrote a blog post about this, about the nature of social justice and environmental justice, and they basically go in opposite directions, right? So because environmental justice is about future generations, about their right to life, like the stuff that Greta Thunberg talks about,
Yeah.
and then social justice is about giving people who are alive today, regardless of your skin color and regardless of your location, like access to a good life, like um, I haven't figured out how you solve that problem. I mean, the best thing I could say is that the rich countries, they should stop economic growth,
Mm.
and then they should give technology, low carbon technology, uh, you know, free of charge to the less developed countries, so that they don't have to go through the coal fired power plants and stuff like that. The long stages of development that it took in the Western countries to get to a stage of reducing CO2 emissions. And yeah, so basically, you have to pursue the social and environmental justice agenda at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be very difficult. And it because so the problem is that we don't have a world government, right? Like you saw the response to COVID, like every country does their own thing. And then the end result is that, I mean, you have some countries that do very well. I mean, like South Korea, Japan, China, Vietnam. I mean, there's a bunch of countries that do very well. And then there's basically the rest of the world. I mean, Europe is doing terribly. North America is doing terribly. In South Africa, there's a rise of infections. So, um, yeah, so we need some kind of global governance scheme that deals with the issue of climate change, and there has to be binding targets
Mm-hmm.
that every jurisdiction in the world has to work towards. Uh, and then, I mean, of course, when I say that, then of course you're gonna have the critics out there who say, this crazy globalist, and which is really there to enrich the Davos crowd and the 1% and all these things. Um, and yeah, that's why it's going to be difficult, right? But you know, uh, but that's what we have to work towards, right? Uh,
I totally agree. And what I see in this whole issue, I mean, I'm also part in a project called Seven Oceans, and it's called Seven Oceans because they want to face seven problems of pollution. And I think the biggest problem when I look at our politics, and also what I really dislike about Greta Thunberg, they're always telling what's bad, and they're not giving, on my opinion, good solutions or any solutions at all. And I think those subjects where we really could have an impact easy without destroying the economics, we're doing nothing. For example, overfishing the oceans. That's stuff that's not necessary. Or I mean, I saw now a story about those Chinese fishing boats next to the Galapagos Islands. Have you heard about it?
No, I
There's
haven't
like,
seen that.
there's like an ocean protection zone, and like most of the sharks are there. And I don't know, if let's say if the Galapagos collapses, we have a huge problem. So they have the Ecuador has built this protection zone, and now you see like every night Chinese fishermen boats lining up at this invisible line on the radar, and then at midnight they turn out their transponder, they disappear, probably fish inside this protected ocean area, and when the sun rises, they're out again. And they say, oh, we can't do anything against it. And on my opinion, send a US warship there and protect this ocean zone. And there are so many things where we have laws or we build up laws to protect something, and they are formulated, or how do you say, when you actually really, like you say, you send a policeman somewhere, you force the law enforcement.
Enforcement, yeah, yeah, you
Yeah,
enforce the
yeah.
law, yeah.
So for example, shark finning is forbidden. Like, they take out the sharks of the water, cut off the fins and throw them back into the water. And do you know which is the biggest shopping place for shark fins on the planet?
No.
Like, most people would probably think it's Japan or China, but it's right in the European Union, in Spain and Portugal, even though it's forbidden. But the law says that if you ship shark fins, you have to ship them together with the body of the shark. So now fishers were smart. They have a huge box. They throw in one body of a shark, basically just the bones, and 100,000 of shark fins. And now it's already good again with the law. So I think there are so many things that we could change that really have an impact without destroying the economy or anything big. I mean, electric cars, yeah, maybe it's a solution in the future, but it's definitely not a solution to push people now to buy a new car. I mean, it's also taking resources, and I think we have to accept that there is no clean source of energy. If you want to have solar energy, you need to get some
It's a
metal
silicate.
from somewhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
you need the lithium. There is no clean energy, and I think the cleanest form of energy in the future probably is nuclear energy, when it's more safe and when we found out a way how to deal with the nuclear waste. We are not there yet, but I feel like we can't even discuss nuclear energy anymore. And I was a big enemy of nuclear energy, but I think that the technology is so far away from Chernobyl and those technologies. So I don't know. What do you think about it?
I think nuclear energy is a good proposal for the short term, at least, until we figured out something better.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine send me an article about fusion energy, which is heavily researched at MIT, which is one of our top institutes for research. And it's sort of like the opposite logic of nuclear fission, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is fusion. But apparently, if you can extract the energy out of that chemical process, uh, it would extract so much energy, so much more than even nuclear energy. And I'm a full supporter of that, at least doing research on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then it's like, is are we going to get there soon enough? That's of course a big question.
Yeah,
I mean, I think short term we have to figure out ways how we consume less energy. Maybe, I mean, this is what we've done during the pandemic, right? I mean, when you say, "Oh my God, I cannot travel to Iran nowadays," and everything, um, well, it also means that Austrian Airlines might be flying
yeah,
less miles, right? Because there's
that's
not as
true.
many people traveling. Um, so reducing that, you could say, a burden via traveling, for instance. I mean, that's a big source of CO2. I think that would be a big benefit. Then you would say, well, okay, what if you're like an airline employee, right? Like,
I actually would say, because I think that tourism or traveling really is the black sheep in this climate conversation. But to be honest, if I compare the numbers, I heard like the whole airline industry is producing the same carbon dioxide like watching online streaming, online pornos on Netflix. So I mean, of course it's bad, and I'm absolutely not objective because I want to fly somewhere, and the more people that want to fly pollute the planet more, definitely. And I'm a bit a contradiction because I'm pro saving the environment, but on the other hand side, I still want to fly somewhere and experience that stuff, even though I know that it's probably not good for the planet. And I really hope that plane engines get more efficient or more energy friendly. I think also, I'm not even sure if CO2 is the biggest problem we have or if it is like the air pollution. Because, I mean, it's so stupid that we are taking down the rainforest, or that we are not, that we, I think we, since the 1920s, we have destroyed 50% of wildlife on this planet, or wildness. And if we would not destroy the forests that exist, if we would try to save the oceans, and I think most people don't know that actually every second breath we take comes from the ocean, and that the oceans are cleaning more air or producing more air than actually the forests on this planet. And if we would take care for those environments, I think our problem with CO2 wouldn't be that big as it is now. But of
because
course,
the ocean would absorb the CO2. That's the argument, right?
absolutely. And but that's the thing. That's why I talked about shark fishing before, because actually we think like, okay, if we kill sharks, who cares? But that's like the top of the, how do you say, the food pyramid in the
Food
ocean.
chain, yeah.
Yeah, food chain. And if we eliminate the shark, the whole system is going to collapse, and we won't have those plants anymore inside the ocean that is actually changing the CO2 to O2. So
Yeah, I think that there's ways how you could increase the CO2 reabsorption. Um,
but you also said your colleagues from China are coughing a lot. I think that's the biggest problem, that we pollute everything. Plastic pollution, air pollution. I think that's the biggest problem we face right now.
well, I mean, I think that there's no clear hierarchy. Like to
Yeah,
say, well, air pollution is the worst, CO2 is the
absolutely.
worst. I think we have to address all of these challenges this at the same
Absolutely.
time, right? Um,
But
because
what I
you
wanted to say is solving that problem would already help solving the next problem.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be a big part of it. I think it's going back to the discussion about the economy. I think what's very important is we have to create a different kind of system which is less reliant on you know economic growth, producing more energy, right, releasing more energy. um I guess converting energy from one form to another, that would be the technical physics terminology here.
Yeah.
But and because things are completely getting out of control at this point, I would say.
Yeah.
And maybe the last best hope that we have is what the two richest people in the world are funding, which is space travel. It's Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. They have their own space travel programs. Um, and Jeff Bezos, he was interviewed about what he was going to do with all of his money, right? It's because he's so rich now. And he said, I wouldn't know where to invest it except into space travel because he wants to take human civilization to new heights. And we have gone to a certain height. I mean, we have never had 7.8 billion people alive at the same time. I mean, that is a huge accomplishment. I mean, we used to be a very small species, right?
Yeah.
Um, and by taking it further, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that humanity is no longer confined to this planet, right? Would actually be able to do space colonization, like we see in like Star Trek and these movies. And then, of course, we don't have those restrictions anymore. Then you're like, okay, we destroy the planet. It doesn't matter. We have another place to live.
Sounds sad to me.
Yeah. So I don't know. So I'm very friendly to Earth conservationism. Um, Mainly because I'm very skeptical about whether space travel will work. Um, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about space travel? I mean, or do you think no, forget about it. Let's just fix the Earth and then be done with it.
I think we should do both. I mean, as you said, to get the human species to a next level, we have to do space travel. And but to say like, okay, we can destroy the Earth because we can live on Mars. It's like, why would I live on Mars? Mars looks now how I imagine how the Earth looks when it's completely destroyed. So why would I like to go there?
Yeah.
Better take care for the Earth. And I mean, I think yeah, the hope is, or my hope is big that we can still protect our planet. But if I look at it, um, let's say not through pink glasses, I think that we are destroying this planet no matter what. Or I don't see that we make like the real turnaround and we can still completely change the game. And but the planet will not care if we kill ourselves. If we kill the planet, we kill ourselves. Except we have space traveling. But I guess we too won't be here anymore when this happens. Probably.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I think this is the kind of project that would take, I would say, a couple of generations, and for us, I think we are still going to witness the all of the painful problems that we've been building up for ourselves. The one is about income and wealth inequality. Like the people at the top getting richer, and then the second is climate change, and economic destruction after that. Um, so we're going to see a big chunk of that, perhaps, um, and it would have to be future generations that will, maybe fix it for us. I don't know. Um, so, um, so yeah, I'll have one last question, and then we should end it, perhaps. Which is, about like broader philosophical concerns, which is, what do you think is the meaning of life? Uh,
Well, to find a meaningful dream and fulfill it by not harming anyone else, I guess. I think that, and from a biological point of view, to get children.
right. It's about
No,
sustaining yourself. Yeah.
it's a super hard question. It's interesting because it's one of the final questions I almost always ask in an interview with the athletes. Like, what's the meaning of life? And yeah, to get smarter, to develop yourself, to, I don't know, I don't want to look back when I'm 70 or 80 and think like, oh, I wish I had done that or this and experienced that. I want to do those things. And of course, still try not to harm others or the planet as good as possible. Of course, I'm harming the planet with flying. And I'm absolutely aware that my CO2 footprint is absolutely horrible. I mean, I published a print magazine. I have to be honest about that. Um, yeah. What do you think is the meaning of life? I'm not sure if my answer is how do you say it, befriedigend.
Satisfactory. Yeah.
That is, yeah,
Yeah. It's a difficult question. I mean, I saw this quote by Richard Feynman. He's a very famous physicist. A couple of months back, uh, and he said that you know we don't know the answer to this question about what is the meaning of life. And he also said that it doesn't really matter because all that matters is that you find a satisfactory, a fun activity, and then you get lost in it.
something
And
you're passionate
you know,
for.
something that you're passionate about, and then all of the societal obligations that you have, which may be, like if you have children, taking care of them, which might be if you have a daytime job that you do this job, right? um, you try to keep those obligations from society to a minimum so that you can pursue your passion. And then your passion, it's like you oftentimes ask yourself, well, why do I have that passion? But it doesn't really have a good answer, right? Like you just, there's something that you enjoyed when you were young, and then you keep doing it, right?
Mm.
And then you get better and better at it, and then you sort of define your benchmark of success. um, one of my professors that I collaborate with, his name is Alejandro Portes. He's one of the biggest sociologists in our field, right? And so we published a paper together, uh, and when we were done with that project, so I came to his office, and I thanked him for taking the time to work with me because he had so many projects. I mean, he's a really busy guy, right? And the fact that he takes our time to work with me was great. Uh, and then his response was, whatever keeps me away from boredom, right?
Yeah,
I'll do
yeah,
that. And that was really striking to me because, like, okay, he's a guy in his 70s already, very experienced, very knowledgeable, but in his, you could say in his long career, his aspiration is to basically publish one article and one book after another, right?
yeah,
And so if you're like an athlete, right, it means that, okay, I go from one competition to the next. And then even if you retire, right, because, as an athlete, you have to retire early, there's still a way how you can stay engaged with the sport. So, I mean, I know in soccer, what happens is that, people become coaches
yeah,
to, the national team or to the, whatever club team. And they're still able to stay engaged with the sport. Um, and yeah, I mean, so for people, I mean, so I grew up in a Christian household, but I'm not, strictly religious. So if you don't really like the, religious explanation about meaning, right? Um, I think this is probably the next best, right? Which is just do what you love doing and do it for as long as you can. And then that's, that's where the meaning comes from, right?
interesting. I actually don't believe in a life after death, but somehow if I question what I'm doing and I really would believe that there would be nothing after death, I think I would do the things way more extreme than I'm doing them now. Like, because then it's just about this. I mean, I think I kind of have this mentality that it's just about this one life that we have because we only have one life. And that's why I want to experience as much as possible and learn as much as possible. But yeah, I think since society is so much, especially also in Austria, I guess it's even bigger in the United States, that there's a life after death and religion plays a big role. I think people are not that aware about that stuff. I don't know. It makes sense what I say.
Yeah, I mean, about this issue of afterlife. I mean, I don't believe that there's an afterlife. Um, like these are stories that are sort of being told. So in the Buddhist version, you're supposed to be reborn over and over again
I don't.
until you reach enlightenment.
Yeah,
And then in the Christian world, you're supposed to join your dead relatives, and you can sort of live a normal life in the afterlife. I don't know. I mean, I would think that this would be that either of these versions is terrible, right?
to live forever is one of the most horrible scenarios I could imagine.
Yeah,
Imagine
exactly.
you're going to be 100,000 years old and everything repeats and repeats.
Right, because see, the problem is that so in our current life, every day when you wake up, right, you have to scheme and plot by definition, right? So
Yeah.
this morning I was like, okay, I was gonna have this podcast with Matthias, and then next day I'll plan another thing, and to have this like you could say nothingness. I mean, if you're wiped out, so there's no worries, there's no concerns, there's no planning. And I know, I mean, it's like if you contemplate it, it can be very anxiety producing. But I think, but anxiety is tied to the will, right?
Hmm.
But then if you don't have a will, I mean, if you're dead, like you can also not be anxious, right? So, um, well, I mean, that's what Epicurus said. It's like a Greek philosopher, right?
Hmm.
It's that if I'm alive, then death is not here, and if I'm dead, then I lack the consciousness, right? I wouldn't even know that
Yeah.
I'm gone. So um, yeah, so I think I mean I think the message I think that I would give to people is that just enjoy what you have. I mean, we can see that all the material success that we built up, it can be destroyed in a moment, right?
Exactly.
Like
And
that's what the pandemic did, right?
yeah.
Um, but you know, so there's external circumstances, you don't control them. Um, the only thing that you do control uh, is is your interpretation of the events,
Yeah.
right? Like always thinking positively, always um, looking forward to the next thing that you do that you want to do. Um, I don't know. I think having a positive, upbeat attitude about the present and the future, I think that's the best thing to have, right?
Yeah.
Under
Yeah.
any circumstances.
What really stick to me was the sentence you said, keep social obligations as low as possible. And I think that's what any entrepreneur is doing. He doesn't want to work for a company, he wants to be his own boss. And I think it's the same decision many people have to take today if they want to have children or not. It's a big social obligation if you have children. And I also don't have an answer for this question for me, how
It's like,
life will.
but you said that biologically reproduction is an important part of you.
Yeah, from a
What do you think?
biological point of view, but I don't like this point of view. It's an answer one time an athlete gave me after he talked a lot about his meaning of life, and then in the end he said, and I that stick with me, like, yeah, and just from a biological perspective, it's to reproduce ourselves. But yeah, that's not the meaning of life I see. I think the meaning of life is that I make the most of my life.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a very individualistic notion, which I think the culture started as very family centric,
Yeah.
right? So this idea of like, okay, I have to reproduce, and then at least I know that my genes are still living, right? I mean, even if you yourself die, but your children, your grandchildren live, so that means that part of your genetic material is there. Um, and that's how most people thought throughout generations. And I think individualism, it's like a specific cultural moment, right? That we can have today, right? Because people are not so reliant on others. Like, I mean, even I mean, like, I'm able to receive a paycheck from the university, so I can buy my own, like, live in my own apartment. So I live away from my parents now. So um and then what happens is that you can have a much more individualistic outlook,
Hmm.
uh and you can sort of pursue your own dreams. um but then, of course, it means that, yeah, your commitment to future generations is a lot less. I mean, like, do you plan on having children now? I mean, or do you think you pushed it out to the future?
I still push it to the future. I mean, I have a girlfriend, I love her, but and we have this discussion, of course, like how we're dealing with this in the future, and I don't have an answer yet. And for me, like what you said, that my family name goes on or my genes continue to be on this planet has absolutely zero meaning to me. Like I couldn't care less about anything, as if there is a Stelzmüller running around in 200 years. Like if like if I think back about my ancestors, if I said it right, like my great
Yeah, your
grandfather,
ancestors. Yeah,
I don't even know his name. So like, and I'm 100% sure that in 100 years, people also won't care about me or who I was or who I am. So why should I care about it too much?
yeah. I mean, it's about, like, I mean, everything is about telling yourself a certain story, right?
Yeah,
And then you have to, in your judgment, you have to choose, like, okay, do I care about this story? I don't care about that story, right?
absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, and yeah, I mean, to have an individual drive, I think that is what we're, you know, reduced to some extent in the present life. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I also have not thought deeply about it, of whether I have a responsibility for future generations. I mean, I certainly know that people who say, well, who have children,
Hmm.
say that they're more concerned about things like the environment,
Hmm.
about future things that would affect their descendants, right? Um, so maybe being a parent makes you more responsible, right? So that could be very well the case.
Yeah.
Um, but also for me, it's difficult because, you see, my passion is like research, reading, writing, things like that. And
You're not polluting anything, or your CO2 footprint is quite low. But
uh, yeah, well, but actually, like, I love book printings as well. So, similar in your industry, right? And I buy all my books in paper form because I want to write inside of
yeah.
them. But if you think about it as a scholarly activity, it's very solitary and it's very time intensive,
Hmm.
right? So, I mean, at this point, I don't have, girlfriend or spouse or children, and and it's good that I'm freed from these obligations,
Yeah.
right? Because then you can throw all of your heart and soul into it, right? So it is very individualistic, right? And and I do receive some parental pressure now. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
you have a duty to reproduce. I'm like, well, um, Okay, so I think we got to a good point here. So thank you, Matthias, for joining me here in the
Thank you
podcast.
so much. It was very interesting to talk with you. I hope my English was good enough for this
It
podcast.
it was perfect. That's great.